Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to the Monumental Project, how historic sites and monuments of yesterday affect us today. I'm your host, Miles Ezilo, and this is sort of the first episode 0.5 in a way. Very soon we'll begin to take the real deep dives into the pieces of American history that you might walk past every day, and how that affects us now. But I think it's important to explain a couple of things before we launch into all of that. What does US ICOMOS even mean? What exactly are we saying when we say monuments of oppression? What is recontextualization? Knowing these answers are crucial for joining us on this experience. Think of these questions as a compass rose, providing the cardinal directions for the journey ahead. To help to answer these questions, I sat down with the program director of the Monuments Toolkit program, Cequyna Moore. Cequyna has extensive government experience, having worked with the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation, the Historic House Trust, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, and countless other projects aimed at linking history with cultural preservation. She's also an adjunct professor at the Hostos Community College, where she teaches a class that explores the intersection between health, ethnicity, and illness. With all of that in mind, I thought she would be a great guest for the first episode of the Monumental Project. I hope you enjoy. Can you give me a bit of a background on US ICOMOS and how this whole toolkit program came to be? I know people are pretty new to the idea of not only the toolkit program, but US ICOMOS in general. So if you can give a bit of a background, that would be great.
Oh, sure. So US ICOMOS, or the United States Committee of the International Committee on Monuments and Sites, is a part of a global network of other ICOMOSs around the world. So you have a ICOMOS Brazil, ICOMOS in the United Kingdom, and we all think about or are working on the same issue, and this is working on best preservation practices, but on a global scale. This organization, we are a part of an independent organizations, but we also are one of the official advising bodies that inform the World Heritage process of UNESCO. So think the pyramids of Giza or the Grand Canyon. Anything that is going to be a World Heritage that can be nominated or be a part of the World Heritage listing, US ICOMOS or ICOMOS is a part of that conversation. So how did we get here? How did US ICOMOS come to work with the Monuments Toolkit project? This happened after I like to call it the Grand Reckoning.
Right.
So this happened after seeing the Right rallies in Charlottesville a few years ago, and also with the George Floyd murder in 2020. And everybody, including US ICOMOS, was thinking, what is the message of our monuments? And who do we choose to honor? And how do you tell the fuller story of what is of a monument and why it would be oppressive?
Right.
And I think that we're at this point in our history where we're willing as a collective body to have this conversation. And this is where the toolkit comes into play. So we want to be able to further foster this conversation, but also provide resources for communities that want to address monuments of these type. Right. And it's a conversation that has always been in process, but this is the moment in time where I think that there is the confluence of different entities able to listen, and to communities that were being marginalized by having these monuments to really listen. And I think that it's also on the other end, you have entities, governing entities that want to address this, but they don't really necessarily know how. So by providing this toolkit, we want to be able to add to the discourse, and then also further the discourse as well.
Definitely. And like you said, I think it's definitely the right time for this conversation to happen, even though it's been, in process for a long time. I think this is the right moment for the dialogue to begin and the the constructed way that US ICOMOS and the Monuments Toolkit is conducting. So thank you. So yeah, let's get into like the bigger questions at hand. What are the necessary terms, in your opinion, that listeners should know about when it comes to, monuments of oppression? What is the things that, in order for you to really get what we're trying to do, what do you kind of need to know?
All right. So, sometimes when you're defining things, you have to really look at the bigger picture and look at things that may seem obvious. So one of the things that we want to do, one of the first steps with understanding monuments of oppression, let's look at the definition for a monument, and then let's look at the definition for oppression. How do you define it? Because
Right.
how I might define it might be different from how you would define it. So for instance, the way that we're looking at monuments at US ICOMOS is a statue, a structure which excludes occupiable buildings, or a plaque that is created to commemorate a person or an event.
Okay.
And that really, the reason why I wanted to really take a look at that is because there's a lot of different ways that you can create a monument. So a monument could be a street sign, it could be a school that's named after someone. So there's all of these different ideas of how people would imagine when they think about a monument. How do you actually come up with a concrete vision or a concrete term to describe something that you assume that everybody would think, that everybody would have an image of what a certain term is,
Of course.
but it might be disparate. So we want to really just take terms that are very obvious, that may seem obvious, but really give it a definition. And I think that as we go forward, it might help to help conceptualize ideas.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, when it comes to, the official title is relocation, removal, and reinterpretation when it comes to the monuments, right? But, one of the words that we are throwing out there is recontextualization. What, in your opinion and in your words, what does that necessarily mean when it comes to monuments of oppression or monuments in general?
Oh, yes. So this is something that when you think about monuments, and especially monuments that are associated with oppression, namely the Confederate monuments, how a lot of them were put up well after the Civil War, and during the Civil Rights Movement, whenever Blacks asserted their civil rights. You have this, the act of having that monument there was sending a message, right? It was sending a message of saying of white superiority. And by having this, having the definition for recontextualization, because let me back up, there are different ways that you can different permutations for addressing a monument, and one of them being flat out removal. And even then, when you remove something, what happens when you remove it? So getting into the definition for recontextualization, the removal could happen there, but what happens when you change the context, meaning changing the surrounding meaning of a particular monument? So, for instance, do you provide interpretive materials that could provide additional insight into the monument? So, for instance, if you have a monument of a Confederate general, having more signage that says, this is the year that it came about, and this is what was happening, and this is why this particular monument can be seen as problematic.
Yeah, I see.
Another part of recontextualization is you're saying that the monument doesn't have to be in its original location. It could be someplace else, but there is something that is providing more depth information to understand again, the context of the monuments of saying, oh, this is someone who led the troops during the for the Confederacy during the Civil War. It says, okay, this is what this meant, providing again more contextualization.
Right. So like adding like color and depth and texture to the entire story to give it not necessarily a new meaning, but to, like you said, add context to everything around it.
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you. So, as you are the program director for the Monuments Toolkit, what is something you want people to take away from the Monuments Toolkit once they use it? What impact would you like it to have?
Well, the impact that I would like to see with this toolkit is for it to be a step in reconciling history. When I say reconciling history, I mean that in order for us to heal as a society, we need to confront and face history in its totality.
Mm.
So I think I had another conversation with someone before, and I had the phrase history no filter.
I like that too.
Without all the bells and whistles, let's get down to the root. What actually happened? What does this mean for, and taking an honest look, what does this mean by having this statue here or having a plaque? What does that mean to communities that are being disparaged by the presence of that? And let's have an honest and frank conversation about all of this.
Right.
And I think that when you actually are at a place where everybody can have their feedback, then I think that's where the healing can happen. And again, this is where we are in this place in time, right, where there's actually people are actually willing to have this conversation. And by having this toolkit, there are other organizations that are doing this work and are actually studying this, but this is our part to add to the discourse and have our offering to help facilitate healing.
Yeah. To use your phrase, I think, history is full of bells and whistles, right? That's kind of, the name of the game. You got to be able to strip that away in order to get to the root of what you really want to gain from, the pieces of your past. So, I think that, it's a shameless plug, but I think that this Toolkits project is going to be really, really impactful for a lot of people, giving them a clear and direct way to interpret the things around them, while also being a part of history in a sense. And finally, without giving too much away, what are you most excited to hear about this season? The Monumental Project podcast is going to be covering a lot of topics, and we've spoken at length about the things that we might be talking about. So, yeah, what things are you most excited to hear about coming from the podcast?
Well, I am excited about all the conversations that we are going to be having with different communities. We're going to be talking to activists. We're going to be talking to government officials and talking to journalists and future activists. And I'm really excited for all of it. And I'm really, again, excited for the conversations that we're having that digs deeper into the nuances. We're getting into the weeds of how of what the issues are and how communities are addressing monuments of oppression. I'm really excited about the conversations that we're going to have with activists. And how and understanding and seeing what the process is and seeing what the conversations that are happening out there.
Yes. I am too, definitely. This is going to be a really fun season. I can imagine all the things that are going to be, on the table. And I think we're going to be able to create a really nice dialogue here. So yeah, I'm excited just as much as you are. Yeah, thank you so much, Cequyna, for your time and your attention and providing insight for who you are and then leading into what the toolkit is. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to the podcast. We'd like to thank the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the entire U.S. ICOMOS team, and all of our listeners around the world. We at the United States Committee of the International Council of Monuments and Sites are building the Monument Relocation, Removal, and Reinterpretation Toolkit with a website and mobile app aimed to educate, guide, and listen to the American people. The conversations created on the Monumental project are just one piece of what U.S. ICOMOS is doing to correctly address American history. With maps, case studies, resource pages, and a lot of great features on the way, be sure to check out the Monuments Toolkit for more information on how you can make a difference. You won't be disappointed. We have some great stuff coming. An essential part of the Monumental project are the opinions and perspectives from our listeners. At the end of the season, we'll be recapping what we've learned and gained from analyzing this topic. We would love to make all of you a part of it. If you'd like to share your thoughts on today's subject matter, feel free to email us at monumental@usicomos.org. We would love to hear your thoughts. Tune in next month as we take time to hear from the activists and community members who made history years ago. And as always, I'm your host, Miles Zezilo. We'll be back soon.